Thank you.
That's a very comfortable.
Our chair, they mentioned a little bit where, they spoke a little bit about the hyphen. And I just wanted to comment with you that I grew up in a neighborhood of immigrants. And I remember being a little kid and being fascinated by the different people that lived in the neighborhood and hearing all those accents and those different languages that I didn't know where they were from. And all these smells and habits and different things that I would see in my neighbors that my family did differently. My family was from Portugal and Austria, so we were all a big stew as well. I mean, this neighborhood of immigrants. And I remember that at that time, I thought it was fascinating and I was so curious to learn about these people. But I had no idea about how difficult it is to be in a foreign country and how difficult it is to adapt and to assimilate, to be part of this new society. Later on, I came to travel and live in different countries, and then I realized and I experienced that myself. So that brought me to study diaspora and exile and immigration and culture and assimilation. These are the topics that I am most passionate about. And then I was thinking about the hyphen for this conference, and I was looking at the meaning of hyphen. What does hyphen mean? Hyphen is a little short horizontal mark, right, that is used to connect words or to divide them. And the hyphenate writer is somebody who is in between two worlds. I was thinking about that. He doesn't belong to neither one of these worlds, right? He belongs to a little bit to where he comes from and a little bit to this new world where he is now. But I think the unique life experience that this hyphenated writer has allows him to connect these two universes. He's connecting these two universes. He doesn't belong to neither one of them. It's kind of a difficult position, I would say. But he has a very unique, special life experience, and that is what makes this type of literature so special, so unique. I think the hyphenated writer is also very divided because, as I said before, he's a little bit into all these different universes. So with this in mind, with the immigrants that I saw in my neighborhood when I was a child, with this fascination I have for other cultures and the geographical locations that I came to live in, and then the changes that I realized in my own identity, because I'm studying this today because I realized that I was changing and my identity was affected. So because of all these things, I'm here today to talk to you a little bit about the Jewish diaspora and identity in Latin American literature. Now I start my paper. The Jewish diaspora placed Jews virtually in virtually every country in the world. What makes these people one is their religion, some would say. But what about those who are not religious? We all know a lot of Jews who are not religious. The topic of identity is highly debated among Jewish scholars, as well as a recurrent theme in works of literature written by Jewish authors throughout the world. In the 20th century, several historical events, such as the Holocaust and the formation of the State of Israel in 1948, have shaped and transformed the way Jewish people regard themselves. Latin America has seen its waves of Jewish immigration from colonial times throughout the 20th century. This hybrid and complex blend has produced a number of Latin American Jewish writers who discuss the topic of identity in their novels, revealing not only questions regarding their Jewishness, but also of their situation as a minority in Latin American societies. In my study, I consider aspects of memory, identity, and assimilation, and observe how the characters of the novels under discussion relate to their local communities, how they deal with their exile, with their conflicts of identity, and ultimately how the characters reflect the writer's own reality. The main theoretic frame used in this is the concept of imagined communities by Benedict Anderson. He comments that we are all aware of how contingent and unavoidable our origins are, our heritage, our gender, our life era, our physical capabilities, our mother tongue, and so forth. Anderson talks about religious communities where people were connected by sacred texts and religious practices that made them one group. What happened along history is that with the decline of ancient religious communities, languages, and lineages, other changes took place in apprehending the world, which made it possible to create the idea of nation. For the Jews all over the world, a Jewish nation did not exist until 1948. Their nation had to be an imagined nation, a promised land kept in their hearts and faithfully waited for. The April 2004 issue of Psychology Today has an article entitled The Identity Dance, in which the author interviews identical twins to find out what similarities and differences there are among them. The article suggests that, and I quote, although genes may influence character and personality more than anything else does, things are not as simple as they seem. Identical twins with identical genes can in fact be very different people. Not only genes determine identity, and I close quote. This rigid idea, the article continues, and I quote, has been replaced with the more flexible and complex view in which DNA and life experience conspire to mold our personalities. And I close quote. Ian Krabs, in his book Experiencing Identity, comments that the central feature of the self in modern society is its reflexivity, a constant questioning and reconstruction of the self in a lifetime project. We are constantly constructing and revising our personal stories and so reconstructing ourselves. Identity is an ongoing process of modifying ourselves and is never stagnant and never completely finished. Diana Fuss adds something interesting to this idea of constructing ourselves. She argues that, and I quote, experience is not merely constructed, but is also constructing itself. And I close quote. Our ever-changing identities are thus a result of many combined elements, genes, DNA, life experience, and the influence of the societies in which we live. It is, after all, a process in which we are constantly reviewing and reconstructing who we are. And we all go through the same process. In order to explore the question of Jewish identity, in order to explore the question of Jewish identity, I'm going to comment on the work of some Latin American Jewish authors whose fictional characters represent the qualities and the struggles of real Jewish individuals. No matter where they come from, their identity will be impacted by the local culture as well as Judaic code of behavior and beliefs inherited from their ancestry. How they assume or hide their origin, their original identity, and how they resist or give in to assimilation varies on many different levels. So before I move on to the Latin American writers that I study, I'm going to comment on one Polish writer that came to live in the United States and died here, because he has such a great example of identity struggle in one of his books. Nobel Prize winner and author Isaac Bashev Singer, in his book Enemies, A Love Story, presents a tormented character, Herman, living in New York in the years after the Holocaust. Herman survives the Holocaust thanks to a Gentile Polish peasant who hides him in the hayloft at her home. After the war, he marries her in gratitude and then comes to America. Herman lives in a constant turmoil, an endless pain of doubt and sorrow. He constantly questions his Jewishness, and I quote, refugees from Germany strolled by. They were talking about houses, shops, the stock market. In what way are they my brothers and sisters? Herman asked himself. What does their Jewishness consist of? What is my Jewishness? They all had the same wish to assimilate as quickly as possible and get rid of their accents. Herman belonged neither to them nor to the American, Polish, or Russian Jews, and I close quote. His behavior indicates the abyss of his life, and I quote, Herman fasted but did not go to the synagogue. He couldn't bring himself to be like one of those assimilated Jews who only prayed on the high holidays. He sometimes prayed to God when he was not fighting with him. And I close quote. Throughout the narrative, we learn that Yaviga, the Gentile he married, loves Herman so much she decides to convert to Judaism. For him, Judaism in America is the following, and I quote, "The neighbors were waiting for Yaviga downstairs, eager to include her in their circle, to teach her the Judaism that remained from their mothers and grandmothers, and which the years in America had diluted and distorted." And I close quote. Herman doesn't feel like those assimilated Jews and thinks that Judaism in America is diluted and distorted. Herman, a fictitious character, gives voice to the thoughts of real Jewish individuals who, similarly tormented, ask themselves questions about their own identity and religiosity. So I thought this was a very good example how the character struggles and is constantly asking these questions. Now I'm going to go to the Latin American authors. In the Argentinian novel No Tan Distinto by Marcelo Birmacher, the Argentinian Jew Saul Buluman travels to Israel looking for answers regarding his identity. Saul wishes to know if he's a good Jew. The book narrates his encounter with relatives and strangers in Israel, with the religion that he never practiced, and finally with himself. The important aspect about the several encounters that Saul has with other Jews throughout the narrative is that each individual Jew is Jewish in his or her own way, but none seems to have the answers to the questions that he makes along the way. Saul travels out of his Jewish neighborhood, De Once, in Buenos Aires, to the land of Israel, hoping to find peace of mind and hoping he will find that he is as Jewish as everybody else is. His contact with the great diversity of Jewish individuals along the novel, from Buenos Aires to Israel and from Israel to the Orthodox Jews of Cuba, bring him to realize that they are all Jews in different ways, in different degrees of religiosity and assimilation, each one adopting the Jewishness that seems more suitable for their beliefs and their lifestyles. But the devastation of assimilation and change in identity is not always directly depicted. In the short story Uncle Facundo by Argentinian Isidoro Bleinstein, the happy domestic life of a Jewish family in Buenos Aires is gradually changed by the unexpected visit of Uncle Facundo, a mysterious relative whose behavior and way of being affects all those around him. The balanced and functional family of four reluctantly embraces the uncle who slowly changes each and every one of them, turning the house into chaos. Little by little, the members of the family start dropping their dearest moral behaviors, principles, by adopting the corrupt, immoral behavior of Uncle Facundo. Decadence is inevitable until one by one they are convinced they have to kill Uncle Facundo in order to restore the life they had previously. Every member of the family participates in the assassination of the undesirable cousin who is buried inside one of the walls of the house. Here, assimilation is seen as a threatening, invisible force that drags the whole family into an abyss of corruption. At the end, the family seems to go back to their old routine, and only a nebulous memory of Uncle Facundo stays in the back of their minds. Their lives are back to normal, but they will never be the same. Margot Glantz, a Mexican-born Jewish writer, explores her family history in her novel Genealogies, where she retells the stories of her parents. Glantz unfolds some of the most crucial as well as ordinary moments of the lives of these immigrants from Russia and Eastern Europe, who found in Mexico a home not always so welcoming to Jews. The detailed, sometimes tragic stories of the pogroms experienced by the family are told by the mother and then by the father, and it's Glantz who comments, I quote, "Living with someone probably means losing part of your identity. Living with someone contaminates. My father alters my mother's childhood, and she loses her patience listening to some accounts of my father's childhood," I close quote. The stories told happened more than 50 years ago, and it all seems distant from her mother's eyes now. The past is a mixture of confusing memories from both her parents. They seem not to be individuals, but one person. Their past history makes them one, with one same past to connect them. Nelson Vieira, professor at Brown University, has recently published a book on 3 Brazilian authors, Jewish authors, who are viewed as outsiders within the Brazilian culture. They are Clarice Lispector, Samuel Ravette, and Moacir Escliar. Clarice Lispector and Samuel Ravette, they have passed away already. Moacir Escliar is quite famous in Brazil, and he's a member of the Brazilian Academy of Letters. Clarice Lispector was born in the Ukraine and went to Brazil when she was only 2 months old. Samuel Ravette went to Brazil from, Poland, I think, when he was 7. Why is this important? Because these people went to another country when they were little. It's so different when you go to a country when you're 20 and when you are 2 months old or when you're 7 years old. I mean, you grew up in that country, you learned that culture. So that's why I emphasize this aspect of the life of the author, because these people grew up there. They were Brazilians mostly, I would say, because they were raised in the culture. Samuel Ravette and Moacir Escliar. Clarice Lispector was born in the Ukraine and got to Brazil when she was only 2 months old. Her family spoke Yiddish at home. However, this aspect of her identity, her Jewishness, was something that most people ignored. Her writing doesn't refer in any instance to her origins. It is simply not there. However, in the total absence of her Jewish identity in her writing, it speaks louder than most texts by other authors who directly talk about the topic. Her most common topics deal with her deepest fears, our deepest fears, our hidden emotions, and the turmoil of everyday life. In her own words, in an interview, Lispector describes her writing as chaotic, intense, out of reality. In 1971, in the collection of short stories entitled Felicidade Clandestina, which is clandestine happiness, that includes the famous short story O Ovo e a Galinha, the egg and the chicken, which was written based on the impact of the death of a criminal, Mineirinho, assassinated by the police with 13 bullets in Rio de Janeiro. In an interview, the same interview that I was watching, given before her death in 1977, Lispector explains that the way in which Mineirinho was killed caused her great revulsion. She said, "One bullet was enough. The rest was just haughtiness." In the short story that she wrote about Mineirinho, she describes how each one of the 13 bullets affects her in a different manner. With the last bullet, the author becomes the victim himself. In the interview, she doesn't smile, but she explains that, and I quote, "Today I'm sad because I'm tired." And later she clarifies, "I'm tired of myself." We could see her Jewishness in the great ability she had on showing human despair, in describing the most painful years, most painful fears of often innocent and marginalized characters. The silence regarding her identity could have very well been an invisible shield of protection that Lispector chose for herself. Theorist Frederick Barth explains that, and I quote, "Since belonging to an ethnic category implies being a certain kind of person, having that basic identity, it also implies a claim to be judged and to judge oneself by those standards that are relevant to that identity," and I close quote. Lispector hated labels. She didn't even like to be considered a writer. Ignoring her Jewish identity protected her literature and herself from being judged and classified under the labels that she so much despised. Now, one interesting aspect of Lispector's life is that she was married to a Brazilian diplomat that was sent to Europe during World War II. So her identity, her Jewish identity was protected under her husband's position, his profession, his last name. Nobody knew she was Jewish. But I often wonder, when I think about this, how she might have felt at the event, being there in Europe during the war and after the war, seeing all the persecution and the massacre and the Holocaust. And she never wrote one line about this. Samuel Ravette was born in Poland and went to Brazil at the age of 7. He wrote stories about immigrants who can't manage to fit in, individuals who felt displaced, uneasy, and uncomfortable. His short stories depict characters haunted by invisible fears of insecurity, inferiority, and loneliness. The author wishes to make the reader think. He challenges the reader to penetrate a world of internal conflict and feelings of inadequacy. He was an introverted man. In the later years of his life, adopted a strange behavior. He would walk down the streets of Brasilia with a cage on his hand. And when asked, he walked down the streets of Brasilia wearing shorts and flip-flops, holding a bird cage in his hand. And when asked what the bird cage was for, he would reply, "I'm going to catch Jewish rats." Ravet felt the stigma of his Jewish ancestry and didn't know how to get rid of it. In his literature, we verify that there is a great internal tension between his identity, defined by his family, and the desire to disengage himself from the idea of the persecuted, victimized Jew. He wrote a series of short stories that review the need for self-annihilation to escape the discrete violence of everyday life and the wounding pain of innocent prejudice. And now my last author, Susana Hertopan, born in Asunción, Paraguay, wrote a novel entitled Barrio Palestina, where the narrator is a boy, Moishel, who tells the story of how his family had to leave Poland right before the German occupation. Moishel describes the feelings they had as they arrived in this tropical land of Paraguay to live in a type of Jewish ghetto where people from Vilna, Varsovia, and other Polish cities already were. The occupants of Barrio Palestina spoke Yiddish and fought to make a living and to adapt to their new conditions and circumstances. At the time of their departure, the family has no idea of the horrendous events that would take place during the war and the mass extermination of Jews. The reader watches how resistant the mother is to settling down in this strange land. She profoundly dislikes the neighborhood, the weather, and the new conditions of her life. Moishel observes how his mother kept all the family clothes inside their suitcases for more than a year. It is only when they start receiving letters from relatives who remained in Europe and realize the persecution and the danger of certain death that they have escaped that she slowly empties the suitcases and organizes the clothes in the closets. Here, a different form of resistance in the behavior of a mother who cannot accept having left her country is revealed in the simple act of keeping the suitcases ready for departure, ready to return home. The mother's resistance slowly fades away and the family settles down. One of the most positive aspects of this forced exile represents for Moishel is the great feeling of freedom that he can now enjoy, so different from the atmosphere of their hometown when pogroms put their lives in danger. And I quote, "Me era difícil creer que podíamos caminar tranquilos y libres, sin miedo." And right after that, pero lo mejor era que podía caminar libre y sin temores, caminar por Barrio Palestina, llegar hasta el mercado, también hasta el puerto. Ya conocí el camino y estaba seguro que no me perdería. I have explored different degrees of Jewishness in the characters of the novels discussed, as well as the authors themselves. The study of these representations may provide more understanding on how kaleidoscopic these characters are. The Jewish individual cannot be defined, but he or she can be better understood and better perceived by others, be them Jewish or non-Jewish. Identity is influenced by memory, by different degrees of assimilation, determined by life experience that is happening every day with every human contact. It is an ongoing process, and the individual is never finished. Jews all over the world are connected by an imaginary community where shared beliefs, behavior, tradition, and religion have bound them together throughout the centuries. Thank you. It's an interesting question because I'm not Jewish. And to be honest with you, in Brazil, I never noticed that, I mean, the Jewish presence it's not something that is emphasized. They are all over Brazil. They are everywhere. It's a very vibrant community in São Paulo. I come from a very big city, 20 million people, so it's very vibrant. But the labels are not so visible. We don't, I mean, it's interesting, but we don't call attention to, oh, he's Jewish, he's not Jewish. It doesn't happen there. When I came to live in the US, and this was almost 10 years ago, I realized that there are certain things that are more visible here, like the labels that people have. This is an African American, this is a Jew, this is a whatever, Asian American, whatever. So there's all this Latino, I mean, there's all these labels, and this was very strong when I came here. I realized that. And what happened is that I have always been very interested in movies about the Holocaust and literature, but it was here in the US that I started meeting more people, and a friend of mine years ago lent me a few books from Jewish authors. So I started reading, but they were American authors. And I read all these books, and I started getting very interested, also because I realized the changes in my identity, as I said. So when I'm faced with my own difficulties, my own changes, all the struggle with assimilation and you know, how I could adapt and assimilate to this society. Then reading all these books, and then later, well, I went for my master's in Spanish and my PhD in Spanish. I had to pick a topic, and I realized there was all these Jews in Latin America and all these great writers, and that's how I started writing about them. And I love the topic. I can't stop now. Yes.